Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet, and today, why I'm skeptical of skepticism. Midway through last decade, I had an interest in science journalism. In fact, historically I've had an interest in science journalism. But when I moved to the US, I was particularly curious associated with the fact that there were no traditional science communicators in the kind of popular media. And instead, you had a variety of press releases from scientists, and you also had folks such as Penn Jillette and his buddy Teller. The narrative associated with skepticism, from my perspective at least, had a particular political twist to it. It was a Cato Institute right libertarian perspective, which I found very curious, and in fact created this multifaceted layering. At some level, there was some description of what I would have considered traditional science, but also there was a bunch of additional stuff going against recycling, going against general environmentalism, going against a wide variety of factors that I thought really had nothing to do with science. And I realized what had occurred was the Cato Institute had come to some conclusion that this was a body of folk who could easily be swayed in a particular direction, and a bunch of people just kind of blindly swerved off in the direction that they were being, narrated towards. You've got the Amazing Randi, people like that, who are, on the fringes of this, but are still part of the narrative. And I guess around that time was also the time that I started listening to podcasts. I moved to the US and I started listening to podcasts around the same time, and I found all these folk together on a wide variety of podcasts. And at the time, I lived in Las Vegas, Nevada, and Las Vegas, Nevada is also obviously the home of Penn Jillette. Penn Jillette had a radio show at the time, and it struck me as very curious that I'd had no problem communicating with a wide variety of folk up until that point of time. And, I was developing artificial life simulation. Artificial life simulation had some connection with Richard Dawkins, so, QED, why wasn't it possible to have any kind of constructive communication with these groups? Turns out they were something just completely different. And through all of this, I tried to understand what science journalism was in this context as well. And the skepticism that I had associated with skepticism started also making me skeptical of science journalism too, particularly when I found some of the kind of curious, anti-Islamic, curious 9/11, just kind of miscreant views, which ultimately had come from Dawkins and co., also started to appear in relatively mainstream science journalism, New Scientist, for example. I don't know. My perspective is I'm probably just a little bit too skeptical for skepticism, and when I have met folks that have spent quality time with skeptics and as part of skeptics organizations, they tend to agree with me. So the analysis that I provided a priori, just looking at these groups and what they were saying, seems to indicate that there are primary political schisms through them, and ultimately studying, following, having an interest in science is something that folks need to do, kin almost like to a speakeasy in terms of not making it official in the US. And we'll talk a little bit more about academic science in another Short Funk recording. But from my perspective, a group that could have been my allies just smelt slightly. And because I start from a view of, philosophical analysis, of political analysis, of understanding that supposed truths that are offered actually probably should be questioned, I doubt I'm going to be doing anything with them soon. It also added a certain curiosity to the work that I was doing. And I don't know. My perspective is when you do a certain body of work, people should be able to, greet you and interact with you as a mutual friend. And when that doesn't occur, and it doesn't occur for really curious political reasons, one should have to be a little bit suspect. My friend Bruce Damer encountered Penn Jillette through a recording of Penn Jillette's show, The Matter of the Bull. Let us just call it that. I don't necessarily want to throw an explicit in here just to describe a television show. And Bruce Damer was contacted by the Jillette establishment in order to appear on this particular recording, associated, I think, with hippies, which had nothing really to do with the broader kind of skepticism, nominally pro-science movement. And it turned out actually that they were going to satirize Bruce Damer in a fashion that I was able to establish, because I said, well, the easiest way is just to get Bruce Damer on Penn Jillette's radio show, and they weren't having any of that. Then it turned out that Penn Jillette didn't like people that had pets. And the whole thing was just very curious. I got a similar narrative associated with Dawkins, but I'll save that for another short funk. Skepticism could have been a good ally. Unfortunately, it wasn't here. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.